Do I look all right for you?
This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena, straight out of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, but have a rockin' I love Toronto background because I consider Toronto my true home. I love Toronto, you know? And but you know what, folks? Here we are on February the 22nd, 2024. And not only do I have a repeat guest on, but my guest has done several tributes with me, as well as coming on talking about himself. But and he interviewed me on my 50th birthday. But among the tributes to give people what people's appetites, Lucille Ball, Ella Fitzgerald, Mary Tyler Moore, Steve Allen, Milton Berle, the beautiful Dawn Wells. Well, folks, here's a seventh, and I can't wait to hear it. I remember this woman so well from a cameo in Airplane because it was the first time I seen her. We're talking about Ethel Merman, and I'm here with Geoffrey Mark, looking very blue. How do you do, Geoffrey?
Am I blue? Am I blue? No, I'm not. I'm happy to be here with you.
I love the blue, mind you. It looks great.
Well, I always want to look special for you, and I just went into my closet of um, sequins, and I thought, ooh, I'll bet blue would look great on his show. So here we are.
Here we are. And folks, I gotta say, I'm saying this as a straight man, but I take this as a compliment. He said I'm number two to Burt Reynolds in sexiness. I'll take that. He put me ahead of Freddie Mercury. He put me ahead of Sergeant Slaughter. Okay. I'll take number two to Burt Reynolds. I mean, how can you speed ahead of the bandit, really. But hey, I'll take it. But I'm always glad to have you on here, Jeff, because man, you're a fountain of information. And boy, the way you tell the stories, all true, but the way you tell the stories is just terrific. And of course, you've got a book coming out. Before we start on Ethel Merman, please plug your book.
Well, I have two books coming out, and at this very moment, I don't have publication dates because I
Okay.
don't know if you're aware the publishing industry is kind of teetering around a little bit. Getting products even printed is now a problem. But I have you've seen the Lucy book, which
Yep.
was my book about Miss Ball's television career. The new Lucy book picks up where that left off with new interviews about her television work. In fact, a lot of new interviews with people like Carol Burnett and Anne Margaret, and I'm just so happy. And I'm adding in her films and her radio shows. As full as I can make that, because with radio shows, you may miss a show here and there because they didn't keep such wonderful records on radio like they did in television. But as much as I can make it complete with wonderful photographs, a new foreword by Fran Drescher, along with the one already in there by Steve Allen.
Oh,
And I
nice.
think you're going to love it. And then there's my memoir, The Devil Was Born in Brooklyn, talking about my career, talking about what it was like to be a gay man back when it wasn't anywhere near as easy as it is today. And it's still not easy today. And then all the celebrities I've known and worked with and loved, and unfortunately my own problems with it, with my childhood and with drugs and alcohol. So it's packed full of stories because I'm a jazz singer, I'm an actor, I'm certainly a best-selling author, but I think maybe what I do best is tell stories.
And you tell them
And
well.
thank you, sir. And as in case you're wondering why we're talking about Ethel Merman, well, If you can look right here, for those of you who can see, I wrote a book on Ethel Merman called The
Yeah, I
Biggest
see
Star
that.
on Broadway. There's a funny thing about that title. Nobody ever noticed where it came from. Miss Merman did a two-part guest appearance on the Lucy Show. Not I Love Lucy, the Lucy Show, where Miss Ball was playing Lucy Carmichael, Miss Vance was playing Vivian Bagley. And they were living in a fictitious town not far from New Rochelle, where Rob and Laura Petrie were living at that moment. And Ethel Merman comes to town, and Lucy gets jealous. And she said, Merman, 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 you think she was the biggest star on Broadway? And Vivian looked at her and said, she is. And it got a big laugh. And that's where the name of the book came from. 3 weeks ago, one person finally made the connection. A Lucy fan made the connection. Oh, that's where the name comes from. Yes, that's where the name comes from. Even the editor of the book didn't ask, but it sold a lot of copies.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ethel Merman, what an interesting personality, and going back to the airplane thing, because I know she made a cameo in Airplane, and it's that movie's so funny. But I love it. You got Robert Hayes there, being patched up there, and he's with Julie Haggerty, and you got one person that's, going under the blankets and thinks he's blah 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 blah, and then you got the Ethel Merman cameo with Robert Hayes goes, so and so thinks he's Ethel Merman. War is hell. Can you do the Ethel Merman from Airplane? I love that where it breaks out
Well,
like a
all she does is in pajamas
yeah.
with her hair done the way she did it herself, by the way, for that. She didn't go with hairdressing, she did that. And with the makeup she would normally wear, she pulls back the cover of the bed and starts to sing Everything's Coming Up Roses. And as she's doing it, they are sedating her with injection. So you'll be swell, you'll be great. Gonna have the whole world on a plate. Starting here, starting now, baby. Everything's coming up road.
I love it.
But you're bringing up what breaks my heart a little bit. In that we are of different generations. I am a little bit older than you, a little bit older than him, and that's all you know of her, really. That's one of the last things she did in her
I know
career.
more than that about her, but that was my first introduction to Ethel Merman.
People today, unfortunately, do not understand the breadth of her career. That Miss Merman got started in the 1920s, appearing in nightclubs, appearing in vaudeville, appearing in stage presentation houses. And I can hear you out there saying, we don't know what a nightclub is. What is vaudeville? What's a stage presentation house? Vaudeville was a kind of show business that no longer really exists. What it was, a structured variety show hosted by a big star in 2 acts. And this was done in big theaters, like a Broadway show would be. And they would have jugglers and dancers and singers and comedians and comedy sketches and 1 act plays and people who were famous or infamous. It was this melange of talent. And Merman was a young girl singer in vaudeville. Uh, Her style is what set her apart. Most female singers back then either sang operatically or they sang with a sweet soprano. Merman did neither. Merman had the volume of an opera singer because there were no microphones on stages back then. But, well, to tell you what Cole Porter said about her, if you have to know about Lily Pons, was a very famous opera singer of the time. And he said Ethel Merman is the missing link between Lily Pons and Mae West. Because a lot of what Merman did in her Broadway shows, her songs, the lyrics, the jokes, were a little naughty. Uh, they couldn't have played on radio back then. They couldn't have played on television till the 70s or 80s because they were naughty. And Merman portrayed various characters, and the songs and the jokes were often about sex or not having sex or wanting sex or what happened last night in sex. Nothing vulgar. I mean, she didn't use the F bomb or anything like that. But words like damn and hell were in some of her songs back when you couldn't do that on a broadcast. And she had worked her way up in the 20s. She had a local radio show in New York for a little while. And then she appeared in a nightclub, if you can say the word nightclub, in a nightclub called Little Russia. And it brought her some press attention. And that helped her to do better in vaudeville. Now, unlike almost everybody else in vaudeville, Miss Merman did not tour the country. She only played vaudeville around the New York City general area. And she was playing the Brooklyn Paramount Theater. And this would be in 1930. She'd made a couple of film shorts. Like I said, she had her own little radio show. Ethel liked to say that she was a complete unknown at this moment I'm about to talk about. That's not true. She was known in New York City. She was an unknown across the country. Locally, people knew who she was. The same way when I was doing cabaret singing way back in the 1970s, I wasn't a national star, but people in New York, oh, he sings in nightclubs. They knew that much. And she was starring at the Brooklyn Paramount. And they were putting together a show at that time, a George and Ira Gershwin show called Girl Crazy. And as Ethel liked to say often, Miss Ginger Rogers had already been cast as the star in the show. Vinton Friedley was producing it, and George and Ira were writing the music. And Ginger's mother, Layla, fancied herself to be a discoverer of talent and went to the Brooklyn Paramount because she heard about Ethel. She loved Ethel's performance. They were having trouble casting the second female lead because in those days in Broadway shows, the plot didn't make a whole lot of sense. And there were people who came on and just came out, sang a song, and left and didn't have a line in dialogue. And that's more or less what this second part was. Well, Vinton Friedley came because Layla said, you can go to see this girl. And Vinton invited Ethel and her agent to go to see George and Ira. In the 70s and early 80s, when Ethel did concerts with symphonies, she told this story. Word for word, exactly the same. I'll give it to you word for word. I'll comment on what was real. So my agent and I went up to see George and Ira Gershwin, who lived on Riverside Drive in 74th Street. Not only was I in awe of meeting the great George Gershwin, I was in awe, A-W-E, awe, that's her Queen's accent coming out, of the apartment building. She said she'd never seen anything like it so large in her life. She was still living out in Queens with her parents. She called Astoria Long Island, but it wasn't Long, it was Queens. Well, she had seen apartment buildings. Come on now. If you go into Manhattan at all, all the buildings are there. You don't only see the one building, you see all of them. But she was impressed because they had the roof penthouse. And as she liked to say, they had the penthouse all sewed up, all to themselves. George had one side, Ira had the other. Now, the real meaning of a penthouse is that it's an apartment on the roof, completely surrounded by the roof garden, and usually filled with very large windows to give you an incredible view. And then you had the whole top of the building to hang out on, to have meals on, to sun yourself, whatever you wanted to do. So she was indeed auditioned. and she sang 3 songs that was in her vaudeville act. I know that one of them was Body and Soul. I think one was Sing You Sinners. I'm not sure what the third one was. And then Mr. Gershwin did sit down and play the 3 songs he'd already written for the part: Boy, What Love Is Done to Me, Sam and Delilah, and I Got Rhythm. Miss Merman claimed that George turned to her and said, Miss Merman, if there's anything about these songs you don't like, I'd be most happy to change them. Now, did he really say that? We'll never know, but it's a great story. And Merman went into rehearsal for Girl Crazy. Merman, in her teens, had been a secretary, a very good stenographer, as a matter of fact. So she had no problem as the show was rehearsed and changed and taking everything down in shorthand and typing it up for everybody. And that impressed the producers. When they saw how funny she could be, because Ethel had a wonderful sense of humor,
Yep.
not about herself, but about the world. Ethel said very funny things. So they began to write the part. She was no longer coming out and just singing a song. No, she had a part in the show. Which was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. History says that Ethel stopped the show with I Got Rhythm. Well, yes, she did, but it wasn't the first time she stopped the show in this show. Sam and Delilah was a naughty look at Samson and Delilah. Only the show was set in the Southwest, and it was about cowboys who were doing girls wrong. And it came almost at the end of the first act. So she'd been a character in this play. She was kind of cute and sexy in a large-breasted kind of way. But she hadn't opened her mouth to sing. Ginger had all the songs, like Embraceable You and those things. And she opened her mouth. She just stood at what's called the proscenium of the stage and opened her mouth and just belted out. Delilah was a floozy. And there was this just noise from the audience, like, what? Who is this? And what is this? Because they had never really heard someone not in an opera or an operetta sing so with such volume. And it stopped the show. And when Merman could quiet them down, she had like 4 lines of dialogue. And then she was into I Got Rhythm, which ends the first act. I Got Rhythm was such a big hit, she had to repeat it 5 times opening night. It's a great song. In fact, it is the favorite of all of George's songs that he wrote. And you want to talk about having accompaniment. In the pit orchestra were Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton. I mean, Harry James. They purposely hired good young jazz players and big band players to give the arrangement the sound they wanted. So imagine all these greats behind Merman while she's singing I Got Rhythm. The gimmick of the song for her, it's not really in the song, it's how she chose to do it, was to hold the I or O or ah. So she sings the song all the way through, and then the song repeats itself, and she would hold this note while she was doing this with her fingers back and forth. And then her eyes went back and forth between her fingers, like, what are you doing, fingers? I didn't make you do that, while she's holding this note. And the audience was going, how can she do that? Now, she didn't hold one note through the entire song. That's the stage gossip version. No, nobody could hold a note that long. She held it for 8 bars. Who could ask for anything more? At 8 bars, and then she sang the bridge, and then 8 bars, and she ended the song. And by intermission, George came to her and said, you just became a very large star, and never take a voice lesson, because she never had one. What she was doing was, it's why Merman's an original. because it was natural to her. It's how she felt the music. And it's why practically every woman who's ever sung on Broadway since then, in some way, is trying to channel Ethel because she was the best. With no offense to Mary Martin, who was a wonderful mentor to me, or Carol Channing, who was a friend, or Joanne Worley, who's a friend, or any of the great ladies of the stage, but they all owe something to Ethel. And that's what got her started in November of 1930 at the Alvin Theater. And she just took off. I'm going to take a short break. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Cut this out, and I'll pick
Sure.
up right where I left off.
Sure. I'm just going to press pause. So, 1930 seemed to be a big year for Ethel Merman because, I mean, even, like even her filmography started there with Follow the Leader. So she, of course, got into music and she got into film. Tell the story about her breaking into film after
Well,
being on the stage.
it actually is a little backwards.
Okay.
She'd done one or two shorts that she never saw and wasn't ever sure they were actually released. So she'd already started doing back in those days on film and up until the 1960s. You didn't just see a film. You saw a film, but first you saw a cartoon and a travelogue and some kind of short subject. And it might be a Three Stooges short, it might be a travelogue, or it might be somebody singing a song, or a Betty Boop cartoon, or a Popeye cartoon, or, you know. So she was doing short films where she would sing. The success of being in Girl Crazy got her a contract to do more shorts. Follow the Leader was actually done before Girl Crazy opened. Once Ginger had met Ethel, the two of them are in this movie. And it was just serendipity that they met. And once again, they needed a second woman, and they were doing a show together anyway. And there they were, shot in New York, filmed in New York. And then after that, Merman was doing Paramount shorts, and they're good. I mean, she's in great voice. She's very young, and we can hear that her voice had not matured fully yet. The vibrato that we've all come to know, and some people make fun of, it was there, but it was a little more fluttery, like a young woman who might do operetta.
Hmm.
It was loud. Um, she was still figuring out her look. She was gaining and losing weight, which she did all her life. So none of the shorts are, oh my goodness, you must go see this short. But they were fun. They were exactly what they were meant to be. Nice entertainment for 7 minutes or 8 minutes or 10 minutes to whet your appetite for the film that was coming. But Merman loved to work. So she was in Girl Crazy. She was making these shorts. She was starring at the casino in the park. So she would do Girl Crazy and then go to the casino and do another show, a nightclub show after that. When Girl Crazy closed, she went right into the Palace Theater and was a headliner there in vaudeville. All through the 30s, Ethel was doing one thing or another, either on Broadway or in Hollywood, because it was one, like I said, one show after another. Take a Chance and George White's Scandals. They were hit shows, which gave her hit songs. So now she had I Got Rhythm and Edie Was a Lady and other things. But the next big show that, like, this is iconic show business, was Anything Goes, her first Cole Porter show. And that's where Ethel met Vivian Vance. Ethel merged to Lucille Ball's Lucy Ricardo. And they became lifelong friends because Vivian was her understudy and had a small part in the show, and went on for Ethel when when she was too ill to perform. And this show gave her I Get a Kick Out of You and You're the Top and Anything Goes and Blow Gabriel Blow. The hits just kept coming. Every show she was in, except maybe for one, there was at least one song that became a hit song, sometimes two or three. But Ethel really wanted to be a movie star. You know, doing a Broadway show, you're performing 8 times a week. You're doing 6 evening shows and 2 matinees. That's a lot of work. You really can't do anything else while you're in the show. Merman used to say it's like taking the veil, which is an expression for becoming a nun, where you shut out everything else you're doing. Your whole life becomes being ready at 8:30, because that's when the show started back in those days, to be your best and to give the people who had paid a whopping $6.60 to come see you to sit in the orchestra the best you could. But she wanted to be a movie star. And she would take time off from Broadway and go out to Hollywood. And she made films with Eddie Cantor. She made films with Bing Crosby. They weren't, again, iconic. You must see this film. It's so wonderful. Film wasn't really Ethel's métier. Uh, it confined her too much. They told her where to stand. They gave her, Ethel stood where she felt like standing. Ethel felt it and went there. Ed Wynn had a wonderful remark about that. How can I be funny over here, but the comedy is over here? Like I need to be over there where I feel it's funny. But in film, you had to do what you're told because the camera has to get you at a certain angle with a certain light. So I don't think her films through the years were all that wonderful. She did 2, maybe 3 films where I think she was wonderful. We'll get to those.
Mm-hmm.
So Ethel was very, very, very busy. And this is just the 1930s, folks. By the time of 1940, her life began to change. She was 10 years older. She had done a string of hit shows with Jimmy Durante, with Bert Lahr, with Bob Hope. And she begun having an affair with the man who owned the Store Club, Sherman Billingsley. In fact, she wore a bracelet. Like I have to tell you where a bracelet is, but if she wore a bracelet in diamonds, one side said Sherm and one side said Merm. And he told her that his marriage was empty, that they were no longer being intimate, but he was staying there for the children. Until Merman read in the paper that Sherman Billingsley's wife was pregnant. And then she knew she'd been lied to. I think she sold the bracelet or had the diamonds repurposed. And she quickly married someone she didn't love just to shake off the shame of it all. Because everyone in New York knew that she was there after every show being with him. That hurt. It was also the beginning of, it seemed like almost every time Merman had a huge win in life, there was a big loss in life at the same time. The 40s were not as filled with work as the 30s had been. She wasn't a young girl anymore. It was getting harder for her to play the ingenue. The parts had to be written for Ethel at her age, because by the time the early 40s are around, she's in her late 30s already. Not that the late 30s is old. To me, that's very, very young. But in show business, you're aging out, and new younger people were coming in behind her, like Mary Martin, like Betty Garrett, like Betty Hutton, who were getting more press. Ethel did do in 1940 a Cole Porter show, and then she married. She married the father of her children. She got pregnant and she couldn't work. In fact, she was doing a show called Something for the Boys, which was a Cole Porter show that wasn't a huge hit. It ran, it made money, but Hey Good Looking is the biggest. How many of you out there have heard Hey Good Looking? I don't mean, hey, hey, good looking, what you got? I don't mean that country song. I mean the Cole Porter song, which, by the way, is very similar, and he should have sued them for that. But I digress. She appeared in Stage Door Canteen, the film, pregnant, singing, will be singing Hallelujah, marching through Berlin to do her war effort stuff. She had her children, and then Irving Berlin had to take over for someone. A show was written about sharpshooter Annie Oakley, and Jerome Kern was going to write the music, and Herb and Dorothy Fields were going to write the lyrics. And unfortunately, very early in the making of the show, Mr. Kern died walking through the streets of New York. He was considered the biggest of them all at that point. And they said, well, we don't want to dump the show, but how do you replace Jerome Kern? And the only name they could, because George Gershwin had passed away, unfortunately, by this point. It wasn't Cole Porter's cup of tea. So Irving Berlin agreed, but he had to write the lyrics too. So that's what he did with his songs. And Ethel got cast. In fact, Ethel got a phone call while she was in the hospital having her second child that we have your next show, Ethel. And she's like, I got gas pains from having a cesarean. I don't want to hear about it. But she eventually agreed to do it. And it was her biggest, as far as a run in a show, her biggest hit. She played 3.5 years on that show. And the incredible songs. They say that falling in love is wonderful. You can't get a man with a gun. I got lost in his arms. There's no business like show business. Practically every song in the show became a hit. And when she was done with that, she started her own radio show and started doing television. In fact, she made her television debut with Milton Berle about 6 weeks after Annie Get Your Gun was over. And I got to discuss this with Milton. In fact, I got to discuss it with Milton the first time I met him. I was asking him, I said, Milton, you and Ethel did a sketch together and a song that went very weird. And both of us at the same time did this, like the Three Stooges doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Ethel had been warned that Milton upstaged his guest stars, either trying to pull attention away from them or literally turned them so that their backs were to the camera. He grabbed them by the shoulder and pushed them. And Miss Merman was having none of that. So in the costume, she sang I Got Rhythm. She sang I Get a Kick Out of You. She stopped the show. And then the second part of the show, they do this sketch and song together. The song is Friendship, another Cole Porter song she made famous. And when Milton went to touch her here on this shoulder to twist her, he found that she'd put very thin little straight pins that couldn't be picked up by the camera. So when he went to touch her, it was like, ow. Well, it's foolish to try to upstage Ethel Merman, but it's also foolish to try to stop Milton Berle when he's on a mission. And they started to sing the song, and he pulled her hat around. He did this under her chin while she was trying to sing. He danced with her. He made noises. They got through the song, and the end of Friendship is, a lot, chick, 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 a lot, dung, dung, dung. Milton wouldn't stop. He's going on and on and on, making these noises. And finally, Ethel pushes him and says, enough already, the song is over. Good evening, friends. And Milton remembered it, and he was amazed. He said, how do you know about that? That's March of 1949. I said, I have a copy of the show. He said, I don't. I said, you do now. And that's how we became friends. So, I'm very connected to these stories. Um, so many of the people Ethel worked with through the years, I got to at least interview or get to know. A lot of the people who have written books about Ethel, I think they really get it wrongly. I'll use correct English because the books make her sound like she's a superficial, one-note woman without much feeling, uh, who didn't like other people and get out of her way because she's the star. In her own book, Ethel tried to dispel that, saying, hey, I'm a woman. I have the same emotions any other woman has. I've had the same heartbreaks. I have children. And, I'm a person. Ethel was intelligent, but not very well educated. She took a secretarial course in high school, which is what some girls did back then. A girl doesn't need to know history or art. She just needs to know how to land a husband and pay for her rent until she does. And that was how Ethel was educated. And she didn't care. She was going into show business. The secretarial stuff was to please her parents, that she had a legitimate skill to use. So she wasn't well educated. She certainly knew how to serve a proper tea. She certainly knew how to eat in a fancy restaurant. She certainly knew the ins and outs of proper etiquette and good manners. She knew them, but she didn't always necessarily choose to use them. She did have a mouth. She liked using dirty words from early on. So her personal, if you were a friend or a coworker, the conversation was peppered with these kinds of things. The famous story that everybody gets wrongly, this is the right story. She was doing 3 films for 20th Century Fox back in the late 30s. She wasn't a contract player. She was hoping to be. So they had an
Mhm.
Ethel Merman day for her with a luncheon. And then they took her around to various sets. And one of the sets they took her to was a Loretta Young set. Now, Ethel had heard from others in Hollywood that Loretta, although very religious, didn't live up to her what she espoused necessarily, and that her adopted daughter was actually her daughter made with Clark Gable. When she found out she was pregnant, Loretta had staged this, and I mean staged this press interview where she's lying on a lounge covered with pillows like she's dying, saying her farewell to her fans. And then she had the baby and gave the baby to an adoption agency in San Francisco. And then, heavens to Murgatroyd, God has cured her. And to thank God, she's adopting a child. So she went and adopted her own daughter. So Merman knew this whole story. It was kept out of the press. And she goes on Loretta's set, and there's this great big staircase that goes nowhere. It's a set. And Ethel knew that. She'd made movies before. She was joking. And Ethel said, where the fuck does this go? Now, Loretta had a rule on her sets that anyone who said hell or damn had to pay a quarter. She had a coffee can, and the money went to Catholic charities. And Loretta said, oh, Miss Merman, you said that word. That'll be 25 cents, chinka, chinka, chinka. And Ethel turned to her and said, tell me, Loretta, how much will it cost me to tell you to go fuck yourself? Yeah. And they remained friends because Ethel was a right wing Republican, and Ethel's friends in Hollywood were other right wing Republicans, like Ginger Rogers, like Loretta Young, like Joan Crawford. That's who she chose to spend her time with. Uh, Ethel had little patience for liberals and Democrats, and she wasn't as nasty, and she didn't feel it was right to impugn other people. She didn't publicly go out and say, all liberals are shitheads. But privately, she thought they were. Uh, Ethel's personal ethics, she was very much a Christian and went to church and believed. But she also had tons of gay friends and was very open sexually. And it has been said she was a lesbian. No, she wasn't. A lesbian had a crush on her and made her life miserable. But Ethel knew lots of lesbians and knew tons of gay men and didn't care. Ethel did not care who anybody had sex with or how other people led their lives. She led her life the way she wanted to lead her life. She wanted to be left alone, and she left them alone. Uh, but she kind of paid for that too, She eventually had to divorce the husband of her children, her husband, the father of her children. Ethel claimed he was an alcoholic. It's kind of sad because I think she really loved him. She followed Annie Get Your Gun. If you're still with us, folks, now we're in 1950. And she followed Annie Get Your Gun with Call Me Madam, another huge Irving Berlin hit. Not as big a hit as Annie Get Your Gun was, but certainly it gave her Hostess with the Mostess on the Ball and the big hit, You're Not Sick, You're Just in Love, which she sang in Counterpoint with Russell Knipe. And that was a huge, huge thing. Ethel sang that song practically every variety and talk show she was on. She would sing that with the host in one form or another. So the 50s were not necessarily her best decade. The man she married after her father of her children was a man named Robert Six. Robert Six was the president of Continental Airlines. Now you have to understand Ethel's type because it goes all the way through her life. She wasn't interested in pretty boys. She wasn't interested in models. She wasn't interested in guys who went to the gym. And I don't think six pack was even a phrase back then. She liked hard drinking, strong, broad shouldered guys who looked like they were blue collar with craggy faces. And, oh, how do you say this nicely? She liked very well endowed men. That's what she looked for in a guy. Probably a little bit on the immature side. I don't think she ever married really, maybe the father of her children, because there was great compatibility, or she and the man were wonderful friends and shared the same interests. It always seemed to be about it being good in the bedroom for her. She had the rest of her life already worked out. She didn't need a man, but she wanted to have good sex. Bob Six was wealthy, but it turned out he was using her. He was using her name and her money to promote his airline. He did not take good care of her financially. In fact, Bob Six billed Merman for her share of the expenses, uh, sent her a bill when she flew on Continental Airlines. You know, Ethel, wake up. I don't care how good it is in the bedroom. This guy is not treating you right. And had her move outside of Denver, and they bought a mansion together. So Ethel announced no more Broadway. I'll be close to Los Angeles from now on. Television and films, that's it. Well, the problem was, of course, that Ethel had to pay for the mansion because he was a little cash strapped, and found out that he was going to New York having an affair. You want to guess who the affair was with?
Just imagine.
Just imagine. Okay, folks, I'm giving you 5 seconds. Think back to the 1950s and think back to television. Who do you think he might have been meeting in New York with whom he was having an affair? 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000. Time's up. Audrey Meadows, Alice on the Honeymooners. So Ethel had made the movie of Call Me Madam and then made the movie There's No Business Like Show Business. We could spend 2 hours talking about one of the weirdest movie musicals ever made, filled with people, but the plot was so. She was part of a vaudeville family. She had absolutely no chemistry with Dan Daly playing her husband. Johnny Ray played her son, who wanted to be a priest, but all of it was alluding that he was gay and how they were losing him to this. But Catholic family would be thrilled their son is becoming a priest. And Mitzi Gaynor played her daughter. Donald O'Connor played her younger son. And Marilyn Monroe played Donald O'Connor's girlfriend. No, none of that was good. None of that was right. And they brought in wars, and they brought in amnesia, and they brought in. And Ethel was not in great voice. By the mid 1950s, Ethel began having a problem with the vibrato in her voice. It was becoming more pronounced. You didn't mind it on the stage because it helped you hear her, but into a microphone, it wasn't as attractive sounding as it might have been earlier in her life. And her marriage is falling apart. So Ethel decided to move back to New York to be in a show called Happy Hunting. The worst name for a show ever, because Ethel was not happy. She didn't want to play old, although she was about 50 when this was going on. Finding her a sexy leading man, not as so it had to be somebody who didn't look like a kid, obviously, but who had enough sex appeal and magic that you'd understand why they're in a relationship. So they got Ricardo Montalban.
I like him, yeah.
Except they didn't get Ricardo Montalban, and I took out the wrong name. Now, I'm going to give you 2 seconds to go, boo, Geoffrey Mark. Come on, let me hear it. You too. Get Reg,
I'm
boo.
not gonna boo you.
It was
Ricardo was
Fernando.
cool.
Yeah, but it was Fernando Lamas who was in the show with her, not Ricardo. So boo me for getting the wrong name. And Abe Burrows was directing it. The music and lyrics were written by a dentist and his partner. Ethel was desperate. She should have waited for a major composer to write her. The plot was around a Philadelphia matron with a grown daughter, marriageable, and they were snubbed by not being invited to the wedding of the year with Grace Kelly and Prince Renier. That's the show. The only 2 songs that were ever sung anywhere afterwards was a fun song called Mutual Admiration Society, which needs to be a duet, and a song Ethel loved to sing, Gee, But It's Good to Be Here, comes from that show. And they went into rehearsals. So let me explain rehearsal process for a Broadway show. The author, the composers, the director, and the main stars sit down at a table, just like on television or a movie when you're rehearsing. You sit at a table and you read the show through. Oh, that phrase is awkward to say. Oh, look at that. You don't give me enough time to change my costume. We have to fix, you fix it. You make it better. And then blocking is putting the show on its feet. The director telling the actors, on this line, you move up stage center. On this line, you shake your head. On this line, you pick up the T. And they began blocking it. And Fernando Lamas, after about 20 minutes of this, starts bellowing in that beautiful voice of his, excuse me, excuse me. And Abe Burrows said, what's the matter, Mr. Lamas? He says, is this the way it's going to be? I say my lines to her, and she says her lines to the audience? And Merman turned to him and said, Mr. Lamas, I've been doing lines on Broadway just this way for 26 years. And Fernando flashed that gorgeous smile of his and said, Oh, Miss Merman, that does not mean you are right. It means you are old. I hope all of you out there are moaning. Would you hear that?
Yeah.
Ethel never spoke to Fernando again off the stage. She only spoke to him in character. It was dumb of him because Ethel and Robert Six were one of the major investors in the show. So she wasn't just his star or co-star. She owned part of the show. He was insulting one of his bosses, basically. When the show went on, because I don't mean to obsess about penis size, but he was known also for being very gifted. And he would grab himself while Merman was singing, while she was talking, if she had her back to him, to pull attention away. So much so that Actors Equity had to step in and say, you can't do that. That is not proper stage etiquette. And if you keep doing it, we're going to fine you. So Ethel couldn't wait for that show to be over. And still they were having marital problems. So she agreed to do Gypsy, which is probably the best Broadway musical ever written. Music by Julie Stein, lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, in only his second Broadway hit. And Jack Klugman played her boyfriend. And it's Gypsy Rose Lee was an enthusiast. She was a stripper, but she wasn't just a stripper. She was a fine actress, a very funny comedian, and most of her stripping was done with a wink to the audience and a smile. And it was more about the laughter as opposed to just showing off her body. Her sister was June Haber, who was a big time actress on Broadway and in films. And Gypsy wrote this book, which wasn't the truth, about their childhood. And it got adopted for a Broadway show where their mother was the lead character. In fact, people were saying, why is Ethel Merman starring in a show called Gypsy when that's not the name of her character? It was a brilliant, brilliant show. It was the first time Merman was playing not just comedy, but drama on a Broadway stage. And all of show business just, we had no idea she was this talented. And she got Some People and Small World and Everything's Coming Up Roses and uh, almost an aria called Rose's Turn at the end of the thing, where she literally, the character has a nervous breakdown while she's singing. And Merman did it tremendously well. The people who think they know better never saw her do it. The people who think they know better have only listened to the cast album, or they heard her towards the end of her life singing Everything's Coming Up Roses, which she still did spectacularly. But her acting, listen to a tape of the entire show, which I have several of from different nights, and listen to what this woman is doing 8 times a week in her early 50s. And it's amazing. The work, the quality, and the energy it took for her, and the chances she took. The show opens. Ethel is, because they don't get this right either. She didn't just walk down the aisle. Ethel is seated in the audience, all the way in the back of the orchestra on the aisle. And she was always seated during the overture so people wouldn't be looking at her. And from the audience, she yells, "Sing out, Louise," and gets up and walk and like, what's going on here? Well, that was taking a chance, and it worked. It is a shame that while all this was happening, Ethel had to divorce Bob Six, who then married Audrey Meadows. And Ethel's daughter graduated high school, little Ethel, and it was becoming obvious that Ethel Jr., that is, mental health issues that Ethel had to be very worried about. And then there was her son, Bob, who was tall and handsome and a very nice man. Now, I've never had sex with him, so I can't tell you this is the absolute truth. But even though he married once, the perception out there is he's probably gay. And if he isn't Bob, I mean no disrespect to you. And in fact, another tragic later in her life, in the 70s, Ethel's daughter-in-law, who she really liked, because she was a lot like Ethel, big and brassy and bold and a wonderful actress, was shot to death in a parking lot after an acting class. So even that. So Ethel one more time decided no more Broadway. She was done. Certainly she was going to get the part of Rose in the movie of Gypsy. And she toured with Gypsy, but she never did with any of her other shows. She toured with Gypsy for almost a year and a half. So she was playing Gypsy for almost 4 years. And then she got the message that Rosalind Russell's husband had bought the rights, that Roz was going to star in it, and she lost. Well, let's see now. She's had this enormous, enormous, enormous life-changing hit with Gypsy. She's divorced her husband. Her daughter is having big mental health issues. She lost the movie of Gypsy. Ethel was not a happy camper. She started playing Vegas and doing her nightclub act in nightclubs and theaters and state fairs. It was not, I don't think, a well put together act. The arrangements were dumbed down a little bit, so that you could use less musicians to save money. And you can't radiate happiness. I don't care how good of an actor you are when you are at heart sick. But she did steal the movie of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which again, like, why aren't we using her for more things? Lucille Ball did a television pilot with her, kind of a musical version of McHale's Navy, where she plays someone, they infer that she's a madam and she owns a house of happiness, but they don't make it that clear. She owns a club, a bar. Winky, winky, winky. It didn't sell to CBS, much to Miss Ball's chagrin, because it was actually kind of good, actually. Miss Ball did a 2-part episode of The Lucy Show featuring her. Ethel was on the Judy Garland show twice, once with Barbra Streisand, the Red Skelton Hour. So she began to be on Ed Sullivan. She was now doing the what a lot of people from Broadway were doing, going to the West Coast and appearing on variety shows and doing what little variety shows were still left in New York, because Ethel was a New Yorker and she lived there. Ethel agreed to do a 20th anniversary of Annie Get Your Gun on Broadway. And Irving Berlin wrote her a brand new song, another counterpoint song called Old Fashioned Wedding, which really makes the show. And it was supposed to go for 6 weeks. Ethel did it at Lincoln Center, on Broadway, and on tour for almost a year. When that success was over, she recorded the show for NBC. And I will never know what happened. But Jerry Orbach, who played the second male lead, told me that the day of the show, they brought in an audience. It wasn't live, they were videotaping it. But Ethel refused to perform in front of an audience. and Ethel was not in great voice. We can only assume she'd gotten some kind of bad news and just couldn't face the audience. A few months later, Ethel's daughter is dead from an overdose of drugs and alcohol. Ethel never believed her daughter took her own life. She believed that she was partying too much and didn't realize that she'd taken too much. It's at this point where her persona changes. She changed her hairstyle a lot. She gained weight. She got thick around the middle. Sometimes she sang very well, and sometimes she didn't. And friends remarked that she was drinking too much. I don't think Merman was ever an alcoholic, but I think she went through a dark period where she just had too much booze, which affected how she looked and how she sounded. And, Ethel was over 60 now. And it was kind of a sad period for her. Her mother and father were still alive, but not in great health. They were pushing 90. Her daughter was gone. She was paying to raise her grandchildren through her son-in-law. She wasn't sure what her son was or wasn't doing exactly, and was kind of vocal about it. Sad. She still did television, but there was something just sad. About 5 or 6 weeks after her daughter died, she went on the Ed Sullivan Show and sang, so let the music play as long as there's a song to sing, and I will stay younger than spring. But so melancholy. She was really singing her heart out in front of 40 million people. It wasn't a happy song. It wasn't a joy. The song is supposed to be joyful. And this was, good heavens, I'm unhappy. Her mother started really getting ill, and Ethel did not want to leave. You haven't asked me a question about 2 hours, have you? I've just been
No,
talking and
no, no,
talking and
no,
talking.
keep going. I'm entranced. Go ahead, please.
Ethel turned down a show she never should have turned down. Ethel turned down Hello, Dolly. Hello, Dolly, the book of the musicalization of The Matchmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Stewart wrote the book with Ethel in mind. Jerry Herman wrote the music with Ethel in mind. And they came to her and she said, no, I don't want to do another long run on Broadway. So instead, my friend Carol Channing got to do it. And she was splendid. And she had a completely different take on the character. But they did have to take 2 songs out. Jerry Herman wrote 2 songs he felt that Ethel Merman was the only person who could sing these songs. And through the years, after about a year or so, Carol left the Broadway version to tour the world with it. My dear friend, may she rest in peace, Carol Cook was the first other Dolly who did it in Australia on tour. Mary Martin took it to Tokyo, Vietnam, and then to London. So she was London's Dolly. And then Ginger Rogers and Betty Grable and Martha Ray and Phyllis Diller and Pearl Bailey did an all African American version of it for about a year. But the show was running out of steam. Barbra Streisand had made the film already, and it was just in release. And David Merrick, the producer of the show, and I heard this from David himself talking with me, they didn't want the show to end. They wanted Hello, Dolly to be the longest running musical in history. And they felt that if they kept it going, it would not only be that, but no one would ever surpass it. And they went to Ethel and said, look, would you do 3 months? That's all they needed to pass the barrier. And Ethel's mother was sick, and she didn't want to leave New York to be in Hollywood, and she didn't want to leave New York to play clubs or state fairs. She wanted to stay close to mom. So she agreed to do the show for 3 months to be home in case her mother needed her. Well, Ethel had so much fun in the show, she did it for 9 months. And when they went into rehearsal, Ethel said, "Hey, whatever happened to those 2 songs?" And they played them for her. Ethel demanded to not just be a carbon copy. She wanted new dresses made for herself. She wanted the show not redirected to her pleasure, but she wanted the freedom to do it her way and not copy what everybody else had done in the show. And they put the 2 songs in. So the Ethel Merman version of Hello Dolly was 20 minutes longer. 10 minutes was for the 2 songs, which got standing ovations. And 10 minutes was because she was Ethel Merman. She got standing ovations every time she opened her mouth. And everyone flocked because everyone knew this was going to be it for her. You know, that a woman her age was not going to sing in a Broadway show 8 times a week. And Ethel was not the kind of woman who would let somebody else play her part for the matinees. She was very satisfied with it, with Mr. Merrick, who she'd worked with in Gypsy. And then right at the end of all of that, her mother died. And then her daughter-in-law got murdered. So Ethel had to reinvent herself one more time. She had been invited by the Boston Pops to come up to Boston. PBS used to have Boston Pops concerts every summer and do, some of her stuff with the full, 75-piece orchestra. And she agreed to it. She had to spend money because her arrangements were for 17 pieces. Now she had to have arrangements for 70 pieces. And she did it, and it was so well received that PBS held it back and aired it the week of the bicentennial as their big salute to Americana. And Ethel began to perform all over the country. It's with symphony orchestras and philharmonic orchestras. She would do this great big medley of songs and tell the story of I Got Rhythm and how she came to sing it. She'd sing They Say That Falling in Love is Wonderful. She'd sing I Get a Kick Out of You. Maybe she'd sing They Say That Falling in Love is Wonderful. And then she closed the show with Everything's Coming Up Roses and There's No Business Like Show Business. And she did that until she died. She appeared on the Match Game a lot. She appeared on Hollywood Squares. She did another television pilot that did not sell. It was burned off over the summer in one of those compilation things they used to put on to burn off pilots that didn't sell just to get their money back. She lived in New York. Her father was still alive. She put him in the same building she lived in on another floor, so she had her privacy, but placed all the furniture so that it was familiar to him because his eyesight was not very good and he wouldn't bump into things. Another big deal was the City of Museum of New York had a Broadway wing to it about Broadway shows. And they asked if Ethel Merman and Mary Martin would do a show together. I purposely skipped this earlier. In 1953, for the Ford 50th anniversary show of the Ford Motor Company, Ethel and Mary, and it's a very long story I won't bore you with, but they got on the same show, each being lied to that the other one was already signed to get them both to do it. Like they'd be the star of the show, but Ethel, how about if Mary sings a song? Or how about if you guys sing one song together? Well, what they ended up doing was this very long medley of songs. First songs from the turn of the century, and then they began to each sing their big hits. It was considered in 1953 the hallmark of all of television up to that date. And pretty much, I don't think it was very often topped as far as the talent, Both Ethel and Mary were an incredible voice, and the reaction just was stupendous. On a live television show, they couldn't continue. They couldn't go on to the next thing. The audience kept calling them back to take bows. So in 1977, the two ladies were asked, "Would you do a two woman show?" And they did. And the tickets went on sale on a Sunday morning, and 7 minutes later, the show was sold out. It was done at the Broadway Theater, which is a large, it's actually the name of a theater, the Broadway Theater. I got angry that I couldn't go. Because by this point, I'm a young man. I met Ethel the first time backstage at Hello Dolly, where I waited for her at the stage door entrance. I was amazed I was the only one. I walked her to her limousine. I opened the door for her. I helped her get in. She went, "Thanks, kid." And that was my first meeting with her. So I wrote a letter to Ethel saying there are a lot of young talent like myself will never get this chance again. If they've padded this place with freebies for friends, they've seen enough of you. We haven't. And my phone rings one day, and it's Ted Fetter, was Cole Porter's cousin, who was staging this thing. And I can hear that he's in a public place. And in the background, I hear Ethel and Mary singing "Send in the Clowns." "Send in the Clowns" is an up-tempo number. And he said, "Geoffrey, can you hear them?" I said, "Yes." "So you know where I am?" I said, "Well, you're at the Broadway Theater, obviously." He said, "Ethel got your letter, and she asked me to call you and tell you that that's not what happened. They literally did sell the whole place out to paying customers. And, $100 a ticket was not small change in 1977. And then he moved in. He said, "Can you hear me?" I said, "Yeah, sure." "All right. At this hour, I want you to knock on the stage door. I will be there. I will let you in, and you will become a stage prop. You won't move. You won't breathe. You won't be able to see much of the show, but you'll be able to hear all of it through the house system." And that's what I did. I did not meet Ethel and Mary that night. I met them both later. Ethel and I want to get this straight, were not, she knew who I was. She remembered me the 3 or 4 times we met, but we were not close friends. We weren't friends. We didn't talk on the phone. We didn't have dinner together. I knew her, she knew me, but like that's it. There are other people in show business, other young talent out there who did become her friend, not I. Mary and I became friends later on. That's for another show. And then again in 1982, for the same museum of the city of New York, for the theater collection, Ethel did a one-woman, one-night stand at Carnegie Hall. I also saw her at Lehman College, which is in the Bronx in New York, and was thrilled that I was sitting with Ann Miller and got to spend the intermission with Ann. And I'm ashamed to admit that I was very high on cocaine, but Ethel was magnificent, just magnificent that night. Um, as if she'd had a larynx lift, as someone once said about her when she was in good voice. Carnegie Hall, she was not in as good a voice, but this was like 2 years later. Um, Ethel was in her 70s now. She'd gotten fat. There's no way around that. Um, and she was booked in 1983 after the Carnegie Hall concert. She was going to be the only performer in history to sing on the Oscars, the Emmys, and the Tonys all in the same year. And Ethel was an extraordinarily organized person. Forgive me if I take a sip of water here.
That's okay.
I've been talking so much.
Oh, I love it when you go, like I said before, I don't need to say anything if my guest knows what they're doing. And I love this. This is great.
Ethel traveled in theatrical trunks, which means there were these great big trunks that opened up. There's two sides to it. One side with hangers to hang your hanging stuff on. The other side had drawers to put your stuff into. You know, in one drawer, and she typed the labels, you know, blue accessories, green accessories, brown accessories, jewelry, and she had more than one trunk. So she never had to unpack. Remember, because I'm saving one story for the last. So remember, she never had to unpack.
Okay.
And she had her stuff packed because first she was going to LA to do the Oscars and the Emmys. She called downstairs to her doorman to ask if he would send someone up to bring her trunks down. While she was making the call, she had a stroke. You want to talk about having fortitude? She knew she was in trouble. She couldn't talk. She couldn't walk. And Ethel had had a major burglary. Major. I mean, they took all her good stuff. So she had like 6 locks on the door to make sure that she wasn't burglarized again. And she dragged herself on the one side of her body that still worked into her living room and had to use her hand to like climb up enough to undo all the different locks. So now they could walk in because they heard on the phone what was happening. And she was just lying on the floor. Ethel had a brain tumor. Some people say she got it because she did a television show and the comedian Marty Allen wrapped some confetti that had not confetti, but like strips of sparkly stuff. And as a joke, wrapped them around her ankles. And she didn't see he was doing it and she fell on her head. And there are people who say that that's how she got the tumor. I will never know if that's the exact truth or not. It was inoperable. They did their best, but it was just a matter of time. Mary Martin rushed to her side. Ethel and Mary had become very good friends towards the end of Ethel's life. They understood each other. They understood the role they played in show business history. They had the same work ethic. Mary had a very different view on reliving old triumphs, which again, I'll tell you about some other time. But she loved Ethel, and Ethel loved her. Ethel, knew that Mary was one of the few people who wasn't there because she was Ethel Merman. She was there because they were friends. And for a while, it looked like Ethel would get better. She was able to talk some after a while. People could go to visit her. Friends like Carol Cook and Leroy Reams would take her out in her wheelchair and let her get some air and things. And then it just started going downhill. And almost to the day, 1 year later, she died. It was a very sad day for me. I didn't know what to do. I mean, again, I'm not her friend. I am not friends with her son. I've met him once at Lehman College when I went backstage. And then Ethel gave me some of her time backstage. I put on what was my fanciest duds back then and just walked the theater district, looking to see if I could run into anybody who knew her and could share my grief. I know it's odd for me to have grief over someone I knew only a very little bit, but she had been so important to my becoming part of show business. I admired her talent, and my beloved grandmother, who people say I talk too much about, tough. adored her. I knew Ethel Merman through my grandmother, who the reason I got to watch Ethel on Judy Garland show is because my grandmother put her foot down. He needs to see this. And anytime Ethel was on TV, unless it was, 10 o'clock at night or something, she made sure I got to watch it. So I knew she was someone special from the time I was like 2 years old. And there is nobody else like her. Mary Martin was an incredibly talented woman and comedian. Carol Channing is her own person, one of the world's greatest satirists and stage performers. Angela Lansbury, you can't take your eyes off of her when she was on the stage. Um, you know, Miss Streisand, again, her own being from another planet because she's so talented. Um, but Ethel was the first of these kinds of ladies. And I think all of them took some from her. The expression taking from her, uh, the expression comes from taking a sermon from a preacher. I take from him at this church. But theatrically, it means you were influenced by some, you take from them. And I think everybody who's ever been in a musical since 1930 has taken from Ethel Merman. Right. So now let's not stop on a this kind of a note. Let's tell the story now. We're going to tell the story of the marriage of Ethel Merman and Ernest Borgnine. Stop tape. I'll be
You want
back
me
in
to pause it?
yes, 1 minute.
Okay.
Hey, friends and fans out there, you may have noticed a couple of times I've asked him to pause because we're not doing this live, we're recording this.
Yep.
Because, I'm at an age where when my diuretic says it's time to go visit the John, it is time to go visit the John. So we jump a little bit while I'm away, but hey, rather than confusing you, I'd rather just tell you I was running to the John and have you wondering what. Nothing happened. Everything came out all right, and here I am back with you.
You're
We
39.
I'm 39. God bless you, sir. God bless. See,
Look,
this is why
I'm
I love
about
this.
to turn 52, and jeepers, I had an eye operation this year, root canal. I feel like Rodney Dangerfield, where he says, my briefcase came off, or the handle came off my briefcase, something come off here. I'm afraid to go to the bathroom. I'm starting to feel like that.
As long as you're this attractive, young man, don't worry about it.
I should
And
have a
that's
shirt made, say, second sexiest man behind Burt Reynolds. I gotta be, I
all
think
right.
that's
You deserve it.
cool.
What you should do is get a picture of Bert shirtless and then put that over it. Second sexiest man under this guy.
Burt was his own kind of guy, he was.
He
But
was.
anyway,
But anyway,
Ethel Merman, you were going to talk about according to Wikipedia, she was married 4 times. So I
yes,
mean,
we've talked
and
about them. We've talked about the other three.
yeah.
We haven't
So
talked
we
about
got
this one.
Ernest Borgnine, of course, was the big one, I guess you could say it that, and
Uh, in more ways than one,
yeah,
and we'll get to that.
yeah. So I'll let you
So,
tell that story.
so Ethel, if you remember my talking about her being a big hit and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and she'd worked with Lucille Ball on her television show, and she went to Las Vegas. So although Ethel was not necessarily a very happy person, she was working a lot. And at a party, she met Ernest Borgnine. Ernie Borgnine was then starring in a sitcom called McHale's Navy. He won an Oscar for a film in the 50s. Ernie wasn't a bad actor. He was, he knew what he was doing. Was he a great actor? No, but he knew how to act and he knew how to do the funnies. And McHale's Navy was a very, very popular television series for, I think, 3 or 4 seasons. Well, he was her type. Broad shouldered, craggy faced, hard drinking, and I guess he made her happy in the bedroom. So they began to date. Ethel had never seen him act in anything. You work 8 shows a week, you don't have time to go to the movies, nor do you have time to watch a television series. You're working at night in nightclubs, in theaters, making. They began to date a lot. From everything I've heard from several sources, the sex was excellent. So he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. Now, whether she thought, well, he has a nice income too, everything won't be on me this time, or hey, I'm approaching 60 and some guy thinks I'm hot, hooray for me. And they flew all over the country. She flew to wherever he might be publicizing McHale's Navy or doing summer stock. He flew to wherever she was appearing, and they had a wonderful time. Except it seems as though the two of them never sat down and actually discussed anything serious or anything important or what married life was going to look like with these two stars. Ethel almost canceled the engagement. Lucille Ball threw her a wedding shower at Desilu Studios. And although Merman was kidding in her book that Lucy had gotten her stationery with Borgnine's initials, and she thought, well, she spent a lot of money on this. I can't use them unless I marry him. That's not the reason why she got married. She may have felt had she spurned him, it would have been bad publicity for her. That's a possibility. But she decided to go ahead with the marriage. They got married, and Ernie had a daughter from her previous marriage. And although neither of them is Jewish at all, they were married under a canopy. Jewish people get married under a canopy, but this is just decoration. And somehow Ernie's daughter fell and broke her arm. And Ernie had to take her to the hospital. So he said, you go on to the reception. I'll get there as soon as I can. So Merman went with her agent in a limo to the reception. And her agent hands her a bill. And she said, why are you handing me a bill? I pay you every month. She said, no, this is the bill for the wedding. She said, what do you mean? He said, Borgnine's people said that your parents are still alive, and it's the woman's parents who pay for weddings. She said, my parents can't afford to pay that. Who's going to pay them? He said, you are. Strike one. Strike one. They have the wedding. Ethel has moved everything from her New York apartment into Borgnine's house in Hollywood. Not in Hollywood, but in the Hollywood area. The next night, they have over Lucille Ball and Gary Morton, Lucille's husband, and Carol Cook, who I've already mentioned, and her husband, Tom, because they were all good friends. They came over for drinks and coffee and cake, something people don't seem to do anymore, but it was a popular thing to do back then, to spend an evening. Ernie was bragging that his wedding gift to Ethel was a cruise to Japan. And then he admitted that it was free. He had done a commercial for Japanese beer in his McHale's Navy drag, and they paid him money and gave him this first class cruise for free. And Ethel said to herself, I paid taxable income to pay for the wedding and the reception, and his gift to me doesn't cost him a penny.
Wow.
Strike two. They leave the next day for the cruise. Now, in those days, they don't use these terms anymore. First class, second class, third class. But first class, people who were in the most expensive cabins, in the most desirable place on the ship. It was a custom back then that no one went to the dining room for dinner. Everyone used their first night out to unpack their clothes, to get settled in. You ordered dinner in from room service, and you just sort of caught your breath so that the next day you get up and be like ready to enjoy your cruise. Well, remember I told you this. Ethel traveled with theatrical trunks. There was no unpacking, but she was furious with Ernie and started drinking, barely speaking to him. Ernie has no idea. He knows he has this new wife. They're starting their life together. They're on this wonderful cruise to Japan that he's providing, in quotes. So he begins to drink. They have their dinner in the cabin, and now it's time to go to bed. And, lustful people who had a sexual magnetism between them. A little anger wasn't going to stand in the way of having some fun. But Ernie, whether it was pressure, confusion, or too much to drink, couldn't rise to the occasion. So Ethel started doing what women had been doing for millennia to help their husbands and boyfriends rise. And her ministrations were getting her nowhere. So Ethel is drunk, angry, and now she's sexually dissatisfied. And looks up at Ernie in the bed. Should give you the position they were in. What are you, some kind of a fag? And Ernie, being Ernie, slaps Ethel across the face. Ethel, being Ethel, slaps him across the face back. Ernie, being Ernie, makes a fist and gives her one right across the chops, sending her off the bed and onto her ass on the floor. Miss Merman picked herself up, dusted herself off, walked over to the phone, ordered ship-to-shore service, because there were no cell phones in those days, and it was very expensive, called her attorney and said, I want out. And her attorney said, Ethel, then you shouldn't have gotten married in California. Because in California, if you leave your husband before 28 days, it is considered not only desertion, but everything you moved into his house, he gets to keep. Because it doesn't show good faith that you really tried to be a wife to him. She got herself another cabin. They went to Japan. They came back on separate airplanes to his house. Ethel stayed in her room, mostly for 28 days. On the 29th day, a moving van showed up, took everything she'd moved into his house and most of the wedding gifts. And she never spoke to Ernie Borgnine again. She would later remark, her marriage to Ernest Borgnine is like a freight train passing a hobo in the night. Why bother looking back? Now, I made sure that Mr. Borgnine got a copy of my Merman book because I tell the story in the book. And Rosemarie was among 3 people who told me that my version is true. That's why Rosemarie wrote the foreword for the book for me. Ernie gave a release saying that Ethel divorced him because she couldn't handle that he was such a much bigger star than she was. Then there are people out there who claim that Mr. Borgnine passed gas. I don't mean belching, I mean the other end. With such a nasty smell and vapor, and that she couldn't live with that. No. Neither of those things is true. Ethel never again got married. And when she was asked about it in public, her answer was, why buy the cow when I can get the milk for free? because these marriages all cost her money. She did not come ahead with any of these marriages. They all drained her. Ethel was very conservative financially. She kept she kept a closet in her apartment in the later years that was for regifting. Because being a celebrity, even I get gifts from people, and you show up, you get a gift, or there's a gift bag waiting for you, or people, fans send you stuff. I mean, it's lovely. But she didn't need any of those things. Whatever she wanted, she bought. So she kept a closet with a tag, what it was, and who gave it to her. So she didn't give back the same gift to someone who gave it to her. And for everybody's birthdays and anniversaries and openings, they got regifted gifts out of Ethel's closet. She also managed to get the urns of ashes of her mother, her father, her daughter, and the father of her children. And she kept those in a closet. And for Christmas, for birthdays, anniversaries, she would sing to them. She'd open the door of the closet and sing to the urns that had their ashes. She said it made her feel better. It made her feel like, they were still there with her and she could still commune with them. So she was not a one note person. Uh, perhaps she wasn't the most feminine woman in the world. Perhaps she was a little bit of a steamroller. Oh, very forward, very, she's taking care of business and get out of her way. Well, you know what? If you're starring on Broadway, you have to be that way. And you scratch most of the women now I'm talking about, who have to look pretty every night, who have to do well every night, who have to fight male chauvinism every night. Lots of women got resentment because they were the star of the show. Well, so she had to learn to like, no, I'm doing my best out here, and I expect everybody else in the company to do their best also. And if you did your best, Ethel was your friend. And if you didn't do your best, Ethel was your enemy. Because she felt you're not doing your best made her show look worse. And Lucille Ball has gotten bad press about being a control freak and a bitch. No, she was taking care of business. Ella Fitzgerald was called petulant for how she handled musicians sometimes. No, she wanted to do her best every night. And that meant, let's pay attention, boys. Come on. Uh, was she a good mother? Probably not. She was too busy to be a good mother. Um, she was a champion for gay rights because so many of her friends were gay, including Cole Porter, who was one of her best friends while he was alive. Um, if you worked with her and went out to lunch, she didn't expect you to pay the bill if you were a man. She'd either split the bill with you or like, I'll pay this time, you pay next time. Business. She only expected to get paid for if she was dating somebody. So much success, so much notoriety, and so much heartbreak, and so many bad knocks happened to her. Unhappy marriages. The father of her children, he committed suicide. From what I understand, when Ethel died, her grandchildren weren't speaking to her. I don't know why. I wish she could have taken to heart better the lyrics to the song that made her famous, I Got Rhythm. Because I Got Rhythm is, in some ways, like the Irving Berlin song for her. I got the sun in the morning and the moon at night, and everything's all right. I Got Rhythm is, be grateful for what you have, and if you've got this stuff, then don't fret the rest of the stuff. Do you hear a song cue coming, sir?
Mm-hmm.
So Greg asked me if I would sing on this episode, and I said yes. The problem with the Zoom and singing is if I play the music here, you lovely folks out there won't hear the music. You'll just hear my voice. So we haven't rehearsed this at all. We probably should have. He's going to play the music 3,000 miles away from me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to sing to it here with this microphone at my desk in Palm Springs. So,
Absolutely.
so I will tell you that this is a wonderful, wonderful. It's almost a jazz arrangement of I Got Rhythm,
Mhm.
going all the way back to her first show. Billy May did the arrangement, and Ethel recorded an album of her hits from the 30s with Billy May. I'm not going to endeavor to sound like her or to hold the long notes. I think that would be insulting. So I'm going to approach it as a jazz song. And we're going to have a moment here of rehearsal. Greg, would you play the song's first 5 or 6 seconds just so I can tell you how loud to make the music so I can hear it?
Did you want me to pause or just keep it going?
Oh, hey friends, you've been with us this long. We've been talking for 2 hours. If you're still with us after 2 hours, hey, looking to see what we have to do sometimes to sound good. Play the music, just like 5 seconds of it.
Okay.
I hear nothing.
How'd that sound?
Like nothing. I heard no sound at all.
Oh, wow. I wonder why. 'Cause I certainly hear it over here
Yeah, I did not
loudly.
hear it. I did not hear it at all, and I'm assuming that our friends out there didn't hear it. If I didn't hear it, that they didn't hear it either. So, friends, this is what happens when you're doing a live to tape show. We have
Uh-huh.
3 options here. I don't sing this time. I play the music on my end and crank it up, and hopefully you can hear some of it. Or I sing something else and I do it a cappella, which means without music, for those of you who don't know musical terms. Uh, your show, sir. What would you like me to do?
Well, I have a feeling since it's screwed up on my end, I can't see it screwing up on your end. I hope not.
I've done lots and lots and lots and lots of podcasts, and
Mhm.
I'm often told they hear my voice fine because it's right in my face.
Okay.
What I will do is crank up the music
Good.
so loud that don't talk, because now it's
Mhm.
really, 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 really loud. And I'm going to take a quick moment here to open up my singing tracks, and I'm going to find it, and hopefully you hear it, because if we don't hear it, this is what's going to happen, folks. He can't. Editing is difficult. We've been live with you. So we'll try it this way, and hopefully it works.
Mhm.
If we don't even talk, because it'll blow my speakers out. If it doesn't work, hey, we tried, and you'll hear me singing what's basically I Got Rhythm a cappella. All right, here we go. Let's try this out. Hopefully you'll hear it. Days can be sunny with never a sigh. Don't need what money can buy. Birds in the trees sing their day full of song. Why shouldn't we sing along? I'm chipper all the day, happy with my lot. How do I get that way? Look at what I got. I got rhythm. I got music. I got my man who could ask for anything more. I got daisies in green pastures. I got my man who could ask for anything more. Old man trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him around my door. I got starlight and I got sweet dreams. I got my man who could ask for anything more. Who could ask for anything more? Ba-do, ba-do, ba, ba-de, ba, do it, ba, 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 dee, do, do, ba, 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 dee, do, la, do, 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 de, do, ba, 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 don, bun, lu, ya, who could ask for anything more? Ba, ba, dee, do, 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 ba, 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 dee, ba, ba, un, cha, ba, dee, do, de, do, 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 da, ba, dee, wow, who could ask for anything more? And old man trouble, say, I don't mind him, cause you won't find him round my door. Ba-da, bop, ba-det, ba-da, bop, ba-det, ba-do, ba-da, ba-do, who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything? Ba-da, bop, ba-det, ba, bop, ba-det, ba-do, ba-do, bop, ba-det, cha-ba, ba, ba, ba-det, more. And there we go.
Fantastic. Yeah, the music barely come through, but you know what? You did a wonderful tribute there to Ethel Merman. She'd be proud to hear that. And I don't know her personally, never met her. I would have been 12 the year she passed, but
Never met her
I'm
then.
certain she would have been proud of that. And you have such gusto and you showed such respect to her talent and her legacy with that.
Well, thank you. Imitating her is useless.
Hmm.
Um, on the other hand, you can't help but be influenced.
Yeah.
I've heard so many people sing I Got Rhythm, and they either try to hold the long notes. The music, when I was scatting, when Merman did it, it was like, these long notes.
Hmm.
Uh, you don't need to hear me do that. You can hear her do that. Just play the record. If you're going to hear me, you're going to hear me do what I do. And I've thought for a long time. I've had that track for several years. This is the first time I've ever done it in public.
Oh,
Actually,
I'm honored.
debuting it on your show. Um, Billy May was a wonderful, wonderful arranger and a very, very nice man and a friend. And I'm glad to honor Billy, and I'm glad to honor Ethel. And I love to sing, and I hope, even though you couldn't hear the music very well, it was blasting here. I could hardly hear myself. I hope you enjoyed my singing. Did I sing well, at least?
You sang phenomenal. And I'm not just saying that. Skittles here will say it too. Skittles,
Oh, hello, Skittles.
Skittles, are you an Ethel Merman fan? Skittles says he tries to meow like that, but he said he cannot make it that perfect.
He tries to go meow like her.
You do that, kitty? Can you do that? You's my buddy, aren't you? You's my buddy.
I love animals. I just love
Yeah,
animals. So I love Skittles.
yeah,
Not as much as I love you, but I love Skittles.
I love Skittles. I was gonna say that even though the music couldn't play here, I did listen to it on my way from work over here. So it's a great arrangement, great music. So
And
absolutely.
now erase it. It's mine.
Hmm.
Nobody else's. Mine.
Yep, absolutely. I do have a couple questions. Number one,
Please.
she worked a few times with Bing Crosby. What was that working relation like?
Very respectful.
Hmm.
Um, Bing was also right wing, so their politics matched up.
Hmm.
In fact, he liked Ethel so much they did two movies together,
Hmm.
and then she was a fairly frequent visitor to his radio show, and they had a lot of fun together. Uh, Ethel, because we don't have video of her doing shows with people like Bob Hope and Jimmy Durante and Bert Lahr, um, Ethel loved comedians and was a wonderful sidekick. She'd laugh and laugh and laugh at their jokes, which made them feel good. And if she was funny on her own, they didn't feel so threatened. So Ethel was kind of smart about it, but also she really appreciated other people's talents. And I don't think Bing would have had her on. I don't know why they didn't do any television together. After radio, they never really worked together again. There was a wonderful special done when Bing died, and they brought like every leading lady he'd ever had on to discuss what it was like to work with him. And Ethel was one of those people, but she never did the Hollywood Palace with him, uh, the way she did with Fred Astaire and Jimmy Durante. Uh, but I think there was a mutual admiration society there.
Okay. The other thing too, like appearance in movies like Airplane and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World and movies like that. She obviously, I love how she played up humor, and she went that direction. Was that a choice she made from a young age to go the humor route? Because she's really good at comedy.
Well, the term for Broadway musicals is musical comedy.
Hmm.
There were really very few musical dramas. Probably the first real was West Side Story, where it had good laughs in it, but there was murder and tragedy and unhappiness. Today, half the musicals are musical dramas and musical theatrics, and there's not a whole lot of laughs. A lot of the people today who are trained to sing for the stage are not told or taught how to be funny. They also just stand there like there's a camera in front of them and they're expecting the camera to focus in on them. Oh, there's this whole audience out there. You go to them. They don't come to you. So Merman's style of going to the audience and performing. Remember the story I told about Fernando Lamas?
Hmm.
Let's say, as we are on the screen I'm looking at right now,
Yep.
I'm on the right, you're on the left in my house.
Hmm.
And if I wanted to talk to you without turning my body, I would go like this. I'll take off my glasses even,
Hmm.
like this,
Hmm.
and say my line to the audience. But from out there, it looks like I'm looking directly at you. That's how she worked. She would never let anything get between her and the audience. And it turned out she did know how to make people laugh. And
Hmm.
she did know how to deliver a comedy line or make a face or do some physical shtick. I mean, she wasn't Lucille Ball or Eve Arden or Carol Channing or Kay Ballard. She wasn't a comedian all by, these people could just do comedy without the singing. Um, but in a show that was written to be funny, she knew how to be funny. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And nothing against Ernest Borgnine, but I think Ethel Merman was a bigger star.
Borgnine had the Oscar. Borgnine had a hit television show. Borgnine, I think, had one more hit television show that wasn't comedy. His career was up and down.
Mhm.
Certainly, Ethel Merman, you count these up, had 15 hit Broadway musicals. And except for Something for the Boys, had at least one hit song from all of them. Between the Broadway shows, the 7 or 8 films that she made, Ethel introduced over 40 songs that became standards. Even if other people eventually, I get a kick out of you. I think 3/4 of our folks who are with us, hopefully after 2 hours and 10 minutes here, we'll think of Frank Sinatra if I get a kick out of you. But Ethel introduced it. It's her song.
Mhm.
All the You're the Top, all the songs I've enumerated to you. It's the Lovely was a duet between her and Bob Hope. Um, I think if we're talking about show business, Fred Astaire once introduced her on the Hollywood Palace, which was a wonderful variety show that came from Hollywood in the 1960s. And he said, not just of the Broadway musical, but this is one of the great talents ever in show business. Ernest Borgnine was a good actor who won an Oscar. I think there's a difference there. I don't think anyone would say that Ernie was one of the great actors of all time. Talented, absolutely.
Oh, Ernie's done
Has,
some great stuff. I agree.
you
Like
know,
I've got
has a
some stuff of his here. So mhm.
has a certain animal magnetism about him for somebody who was not in good shape. Yeah, I can see why Ethel or other women or some gay men might find Ernie attractive. I don't, but he's not my type. We know what my type is.
Burt
No, I
Reynolds.
think if you're talking about the history of show business, Ernie has a paragraph, Ethel has a chapter, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's why I wanted to write about her, because all of the tragedies, all the things she had to endure to become who she was, all the things she had to swallow. Her father was from Germany, her mother was from Scotland. World War II was not easy for Ethel because they were very German friendly in her home. And to have to watch what your recent ancestors are doing. I mean, Ethel in no way thought Hitler was good or that Nazis were good, but she loved Germany. Her father was a German.
Hmm.
Hard for her. Um, Died in the Will Republican. But when President Kennedy got inaugurated the night before, there was a big party, and Ethel sang Everything's Coming Up Roses right to his face because he was the president elect, irrespective of who she actually voted for. And then 20 years later, she did it for Ronald Reagan. Um, she was supportive of young talents as long as they did their best. She loved Judy Garland. They were very close friends. She admired Barbara Streisand. She was, I think, opening night, a funny girl. Ethel was there in a dressing room with her. Um, she appreciated talent in other people. She appreciated kindness in other people. Um, I think she was a little wild sexually and paid the price for it. And it's very difficult for anyone, but especially a woman, to get famous when you're young. So she was, in her mid 20s when she first got on Broadway, but she'd been working since she was a teenager. And here she is, singing for the president in 1980, 50 years later, still being considered one of the biggest stars in the world. There's a price to pay for everything. Nothing is ever free. Um, for me to be Geoffrey Mark, we've had this discussion on the air. I paid a price for that. For choosing to be out all of my career, I paid a price for that. I pay a price for being Jewish. Um, Ethel had a little bit of anti-Semitism in her. Again, Germans of that era, I'm talking about. Um, she didn't have close Jewish friends, really. She didn't hate them. She realized that most of the people who wrote her music were Jewish people, except for Cole Porter. Um, she just felt that Christianity was superior and didn't understand why Jews didn't love Christ because she did. She was a deep believer in Jesus and did not understand anyone not being that way. Did she show up at Nazi Bund rallies? No, of course not.
No.
Um, she was who she was, the good and the bad, and adapted to the times as she had to. You know, she began singing some of her hits with a kind of a rock and roll beat in the 60s. She did a disco, folks, she did a disco album in 1979. People say
Wow.
that's what killed disco. Was Ethel recording 5 or 6 of her big hits in disco.
Oh, I think it's great. Shows she adapts.
And it sold well. and I was the first one to get one
Hmm.
from her. But was it a wonderful album? No, no. Even with Peter Matz doing the arranging, and even with Donna Summer in the studio with her, helping her find the beat, because she was Ethel Merman. And whether you liked her personally or disliked her personally, whether you feel she was never vulgar, and those of us who say she was are lying, or whether you loved her vulgarity. And there were times when Ethel used epithets for certain ethnic groups that I wish she hadn't. And I'm not going to use them now. But it was funny when my Merman book came out. We did a big show in New York at a nightclub to promote the book, and I had Dodie Goodman and Leroy Reams come and sing and do comedy, and I sang, and some other cabaret performers in New York before Ethel came out. And Leroy, who was a dear friend and a great talent, and you should have him on your show sometime,
Sure.
um, told a story of Ethel using one of those words. And two friends of hers, who I will keep nameless, walked out of my show because they thought Leroy was lying. But their friend Ethel never talked like that. Well, I believe Leroy. I've known Leroy 40 years. I believe him. And he wasn't trying to put Ethel down. He was trying to get a laugh. And he got it. Because the way he told the story, he, you know, said the right words around it, that, hey, none of us should talk like that. But one day she said this, and it was funny. Uh, that I think that's why I wrote the book. The books that have been written about her, even her own autobiography. It's like, boy, is this superficial. Boy, is this giving us. I think one biographer called it the Merman Code of her always being right and everybody else being wrong. Maybe on stage she felt that way, that no one knew better than she how to present herself on a stage. But to say that's how she was in life always, that's a very broad brush to paint anyone with. It's like saying Geoffrey Mark wears sequins. That's it. That's all you have to know. No, that's the superficial. I'm a person. I'm a Python. And I've had great successes and awards and broken hearts and bad bumps happen to me. Just this last week, I've lost 3 friends. What can you do? You know, I can crawl into a hole or say, gosh, I wish they didn't die. And gosh, I wish they hadn't suffered before they died. But I don't have the power to change that. All I can do is cry for them a little bit, be there for their loved ones, and accept it. Now, personally, I plan to live forever, but that's just me. Because really and truly,
Absolutely.
who could ask for anything more? I'm a lucky, 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 lucky guy.
And I'm very lucky for having you on here tonight, and
This is
like I
probably the
said,
longest show you've ever had.
actually the longest was 5 hours and 20 minutes. Paul M.
Real,
Salmon was on here and he did the book Future Door, the making a Blade Runner, which I have. And he also was on set for Conan the Barbarian. And I love both of those movies. And boy, I was not expecting it. And mostly it was him talking, and I just let him go. And people say, won't you cut that down? Isn't that too long? I'm saying, if you're interested in Blade Runner or Conan the Barbarian, you'll come back to it. That's what I always say to people, I don't cut stuff down to deal with Gen Z and their attention spans. I'm sorry, I don't do that.
while we have a moment, I also would like to say something about uh, my book
Hmm.
and jealousy.
Yeah.
Ethel had a lot of gay friends, people who were very close to her, people who were a little close to her, people who, had a dinner or two with her. I've gotten so much pushback from gay men about what I wrote about Ethel. So much, how dare I throw mud or throw shade, as they like to say, on their icon. Yeah, well, maybe that is the truth, but why did you say it? Because if I'm writing a book, I'm a journalist. I'm not a fanboy.
Hmm.
There are people who said I've lied in the book. Prove me wrong, folks. There's one person out there, and I won't mention his name because I don't want to give him any publicity, who says, you can't believe a word that comes out of my mouth, especially about Ethel. I'm always lying. And this person lies about his relationship with Ethel all the time. Not that he didn't have one, he did for about a year. And I don't care. I don't go through life comparing myself. When my Merman book came out, it did so well. In a few months, there were 3 more Ethel Merman books out. I'll take that as a compliment.
You know what? It's interesting you say that. I've had people have hit me up and say, "Oh, Jeffrey Mark's not telling the truth, not telling the truth," and yet I keep having you back. So
You mean you've actually heard this yourself
yeah,
about my not telling the truth?
yeah, and it's funny because I don't buy that. I think that you're not only do I think you're telling the truth, but but um, but put it this way, I wouldn't be having you back several times if I didn't think you were telling the truth. And look how many times I've had you on here.
Like
I've
12 times now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
off camera, I'd love to know who thinks I'm lying, but um, that's a part of show business too, unfortunately. We said this off mic, I think, off mic. Elizabeth Taylor said, if people start lying about you and calling you a liar, you've made it. Because now they're talking about you and throwing mud on you. That means you've become a star. And that's the way
mhm.
I take it. Um, there are people out there who want to own Lucille Ball. They want to own Ella Fitzgerald. They want to own Ethel Merman. They know better than I. I'm a liar. Well, then why don't you write your own book? Why was I the one to sell a book to a publisher and get it published? And publishers aren't going to publish books they know are filled with lies because they're
Mhm.
liable for libel. And a little pun there. I don't get that jealousy thing. Um, and when I find myself being jealous, I have to remind myself, hey, that's their success, not your success. And the more success they have, that means there's more success out there for you. And good for them because they've worked hard to get where they are. I think I've told you before on camera, I went to a party many years ago when I first moved out here to the desert. And it was not a show business party, it was a civilian party, meaning non show business. And when people find out oh, you're Geoffrey Mark, or oh, I didn't realize that was you, or oh, Geoffrey Mark, what are you doing here? Inevitably, they start talking about Lucille Ball. And these people, who I'm sure are nice folks otherwise, started telling all of these negative stories about her, which I didn't like. Some of them weren't true. And if they were true, they were taken out of context. And then they got to one where I was a player. Oh, for the 50th anniversary of I Love Lucy, there was a party thrown in the original soundstage of I Love Lucy, and Desi Arnaz Jr. showed up all drunk and stoned and embarrassing, and they had to remove him. And I said, just a moment. First of all, Desi Arnaz Jr. is my friend. You are throwing mud on my friend. Please stop. Secondly, I was there. And yes, there was a party thrown by TV Land. No, it was not on the original soundstage of I Love Lucy because it was being used for a movie that week. We were on the Burns and Allen soundstage. And number three, Desi showed up clean, sober, handsome, charming, sought me out, immediately came over to me, hugged me, and kissed me. And because he hugged me and kissed me first, all these stories of jealous people, and then gets repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. Sorry, it's not true. And I'm not, and they asked me to leave, actually.
Oh,
How
gee.
dare I disrespect them by telling the truth?
Hmm.
Sorry, I have no patience for that.
Yeah.
So I do want to hear later from you who's saying I'm a liar, but
Yeah.
in the big picture, it doesn't really matter.
Well,
Um,
I'll tell you what, I'm going to I'll get you to stay on after we do our close off.
okay.
And but I want to get you to do uh what do they call that? I'm losing my
A plug for
promo
you,
there.
sir?
Huh?
A plug for you?
Plug. There you go. And it was great to have you on here in honor of Ethel Merman. I think you did a wonderful tribute to her. And yes, absolutely. So I'll get you to do a plug for my show, and I think you know how it all goes.
Hey, friends and fans out there, this is Geoffrey Mark. Why aren't you watching Python's Paradise starring my friend, Greg Gilbert? Every week he's got someone fascinating on, and many times it's me. So tune in for this show wherever you find great podcasts. Do it now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. And yes, we honor the memory of Ethel Merman. Absolutely.
All right, sir. Hey, fakes. No, no. Fans and friends. I've had a wonderful time with you. Stick with Greg. He's the best. And I will see you next time. Please tune in to my podcast and radio show. Geoffrey Mark plays Ella, where every week we pick about 8 or 9 songs on a pattern or a theme, and I tell you insider stories on how the music was made and what's so fascinating about it. Geoffrey Mark plays Ella on radio stations in the United States or on podcasts all over the world.
And where can people get your books?
Get them from me. Contact Greg and buy them directly from me, and you'll get one autographed and less expensively than if you try to buy it online.
There you go. Well, there you go, folks. And he has written about the best, and he's come on here and talked about the best. And Ethel Merman is certainly one of those. So, with that, we close this off. And a wonderful salute to a
Have a
great icon.
have a happy everybody.